Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
All right, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Generous Business Owners Podcast. This week, we have a special guest, Roger Garber, who transitioned from a family business. He's now a consultant at the North Group, which is a consulting firm that works with organizations, business owners, and churches in improving their organizational health and performance. Roger, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for inviting me on. I feel very, very humbled to be here.
Well, we are blessed to have you. Really looking forward to this week's episode. Roger, kick us off and tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in the Garber household.
Yeah, so I'm really fortunate. I grew up on a farm in Lancaster County, close-knit, faith-based family. I have three sisters, brother, foster brother. And being agriculture, we learned how to work hard, and I feel blessed by that. But I often say that my story starts in junior high. Like I carry in my wallet. If I had my wallet with me, I'd show you a picture of me from junior high. This goofy kid, goofy haircut, braces, because I really struggled as a kid. I just really struggled with self-confidence. And so I say that my story started then. But I'm fortunate because in our home, my parents loved each other. They loved each of us. They showed us what love looked like. And I'm really fortunate, Jeff. As you know, my parents are both still living. My dad is 91, soon to be 92. Mom just turned 90 in June. And if you ever get a chance to meet them, you would just really enjoy it, because they just have a way to impact people in a real positive life. And so that's just a little bit about where I grew up. I grew up in a public school, but then my senior year, and that's part of my story, I transferred to a private school, and I can talk about that then later.
Yeah. So tell me about anything entrepreneurial or anything creative in those school years outside of the ordinary, or any fun stories.
Yeah, so I have two that I think of that would be fun to share. One is Cantelopes. So one day my mom came home from a local produce auction, and she brought, I don't remember how many flats. I was just a teenager, but she brought a couple flats of transplanted cantaloupe plants. They were about this tall. And I said, "What are they for?" And she said, "Well, you need to plant them. That's going to be your project this summer." And she bought them for a song, and I went out and planted cantaloupes that first year, and ended up raising cantaloupes for a number of years. And it was just a lot of fun. I'd sell them at the end of the lane. I'd sell them to neighbors, just come out of a family of many entrepreneurs. If you know any of my siblings or my parents, you know that they're true entrepreneurs. And so I learned that. The other thing that I probably would not want to communicate very loudly was there was a season of my life where I would buy some firecrackers and I would sell them for substantially more than I bought them for. And
That's awesome. Yeah.
Don't want to talk about that a whole lot, but it is a true story.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's what we've noticed a theme on the Generous Business Owners Podcast, that there was always something in those early years that was bought and sold for some kind of a profit, and it wasn't always perfectly legal. As long as none of the firecrackers ended up inside of the cantaloupes, we were probably okay.
I'm just not going to keep talking about.
You can't confirm or deny. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. What happened with those, and it's just part of my story of cantaloupes.
That's awesome.
Firecrackers.
Yeah. Well, speaking of firecrackers, I mean, your parents, for being both 90, 91, they're firecrackers. I mean, some of the energy and Talk if you could for a minute before you leave those early years
Mhm.
about what are some of the core values that were sometimes caught. Sometimes we have more caught than taught.
Yeah.
Some of those values that we pick up during those early
I
years.
just remember from an early age, Dad, and his generosity of the way that he quietly supported many individuals and many ministries. Because I'd get to sit beside him at his desk. I could have this picture in my mind of this desk in our family room when I was a teenager,
Hmm.
and the way that he was generous with his finances, and the way that the Lord tugged at his heart. And but it was part of that was our work ethic, that we needed to get out and get it done, and just their generosity. My brother Earl, foster brother Earl, but my brother Earl, who's part of our family, he and his wife Tina and their children and now grandchildren. But Earl came into our life when he was 12, stayed till he was 18, and Earl's about a year and a half older than I am. And so we had this really tight bond, but just the way that mom and dad cared significantly for him. And then for my mom's side, mom came from a large family, and just her ability to take nothing and create a lot. She has this ability that she
Hmm.
can pull something out of the freezer and create a meal for 27 people, and there's still, baskets of loaves and fishes after we're done when my mom. But the way that mom and dad invited individuals into our home, I could name off multiple names of people that lived in our home as a kid, and after we left home, got married and left. But the way that they cared for people, that when
Hmm.
somebody walked into our home at 706 Milton Grove Road, and they knew that this home was different. We had a major highway that went through our farm, and people would walk off the street, off the highway, they'd break down or whatever. And the way that my parents cared for those people,
Hmm.
and those individuals that came into our home, and still to this day, my parents are greeters at a large church. At
Hmm.
90 and 91, they're greeters, and
Yeah.
they still care. And my dad will recall names like this
Yes.
at 91 years old. He's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
awesome.
forget what I had for lunch.
Yes.
And but those things that I thought, that I saw. The other thing that I remember as a kid was the way the that when our family of 8 sat around the table, and the joy that that brought to my mom and to my dad. And I look at it, and today I was talking to a friend here earlier in the next room over, and just half an hour ago, and I'm talking to him about the way, by the grace of God, of where I grew up, that I don't understand the pain that other people have gone through,
Mm.
but I still have to take what God's given me
Hmm.
and say, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do with it?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so
That's
I don't know
awesome.
if that's what you're looking for, but
That's
that's,
awesome. No, there's definitely power in that, a very, very strong foundation. And that's really refreshing to hear that strong relationship. And you can tell the deep respect and love you have for your parents all these years later. And it all started with Cantelopes and Firecrackers. And just that, and a tremendous example of hospitality, generosity, and hard work.
Mhm.
But yeah, to walk us through maybe some of the school years, the
Sure,
early years of your career, and
sure.
then we want to get to talking a little bit about your time there at the North Group.
Yeah. So, like I said, I struggled with low self-confidence. And in my life, I feel that there's 4 or 5 things that really got me through that. And one of those things was, mm, um, so I went into a public school. Before I get into those couple things, I was at a public school, and I say that I had 2 friends at school. Tim and John, they were my friends, but I couldn't do academics. I couldn't do sports. I
Mm.
wasn't good at drama. I was awful singer. And it's a whole nother story about that, of how I got picked on, not physically,
Mm.
but in some of those situations that I could go into stories, but it was really tough for me in those junior high years and high school years. But there's four things that got me through that. One was my mom on her knees praying for me. And
Mm-hmm.
she would tell me that, and she would
Mm-hmm.
talk about stories. And if you'd ever see my mom, you could ask her the stories about that, and the way that God answered prayer in that. The second thing was God placed in my life from church we were attending at the time, a guy by the name of Randy.
Mm.
Randy and Jeff, I could cry talking about what Randy has done for me in my life and the
Mm-hmm.
impact that this guy has had in my life. And I was just texting him this morning, and this guy from first grade on has been a very close friend and a very high impact in my life. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The the third thing that happened was in between my junior and senior high years, um, at Mannheim, I found a camera. I had some money and I bought a camera.
Mm.
And at Mannheim, I joined yearbook, and my camera became my invitation to go into sporting events. Because I
Mm.
didn't have friends that would call me up and say, "Hey, Rod, you want to go to the football game? Hey, Rod, you want to go to the wrestling
Mm.
match, soccer game, whatever."
Mm.
But I found this camera, and being on yearbook, I could go in and sit beside the wrestling match, the
Mm.
mat on the
Mm.
floor, and I didn't have to walk in the gym and say, "Oh my word, who am I going to sit with? I don't have
Mm-hmm.
any friends here." And
Mm.
so I found the camera, and I got put on yearbook at a local public school. And in between my junior and senior year, my friend Randy was at a private school on yearbook. And he said, "Raj," he said, "senior year, why don't you come down to this private school?" He said, "I'll get you on yearbook." And Jeff, God took that opportunity, and I walked in that school with two friends,
Mm.
and I walked out with 100.
Oh,
I
wow.
walked out with guys that to this day are some of my closest friends
Mm.
for 1 year of high school.
Wow. That's
And
unusual.
then the
Yeah.
fourth thing was individuals through that time that um, they saw me, they cared for me, they poured into my life as a mentor, through youth group, through church, or others, that they would see me, pull me aside, and really care for me.
Wow.
So those are the four things. That's something that happened in high school. And then as I came out of high school, went to 6 months in Bible school out in Colorado. It was more ski school than Bible school. Went to Bible school out there, and it was in the middle of when we had poultry on the farm, and there was a flu that was going through, and I didn't think the farm could survive without me. Came back to the farm, and I really, in my heart, wanted to go to college, but I didn't know how to do it. I
Mm.
was scared of college. I didn't have anybody to put their arm around me and say, "Raj, this is how you apply at a
Mm-hmm.
local community college, and
Mm-hmm.
you can do this. I believe in you." Didn't have
Mm-hmm.
anybody around me to do that. So I came back, got involved in the farm, and the it was cool. Got involved there, and with my dad, my brother, and my brother Phil is a phenomenal visionary. I
Mm.
was so fortunate to work side by side with Phil for 30 years, and fortunate that our relationship is strong today. But then got involved in the business. At that point, we were solely ag. We were doing crop production and poultry, and had cattle. And then we also got into some hogs for a season. And Phil, in his vision, would say, "Hey, we're going over there."
Mm.
And I'd figure out how to get us over there. I was the operations guy. And in there, one day I walked into an event, and I saw my future wife sitting across the table from me, and I was just smitten.
Okay. Here we go.
1986, I married my bride, and her name is Patty. And
Okay.
Patty, I can't say enough about the support and how she is the one that holds things tight, prays for me, cares for me,
Mm-hmm.
and makes me a better dad, helps to make me a better friend, a better consultant. And she would put her stick in her eye rather than being in the next room in a meeting. Then, but she knows that I know she'll pray for me. So we've been married 38 years.
Wow.
Yeah, through that
Congratulations.
time. Thanks. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you were smitten and she obviously said yes.
She did say yes. I had to twist her arm a little bit. She said she grew up in a local community and she never wanted to marry a farmer. And here I drug her 45 minutes from home and drug her to this little town called Mount Joy.
So Roger, tell us a little bit about your immediate family, and
Yeah,
then a little bit about the transition from from your family business into a consultant at the North Group,
yeah.
and a little
So
bit about that.
real quick, so we have 4 children. We
Mhm.
have 3 girls and a boy. Uh, They are three of our kids are married. We have 7 granddaughters, 1 grandson. Now
Okay.
you wonder who wants to run towards Papa. I'm called Papa, and
That's
Colson runs
awesome.
towards Papa. And
That's
then the other thing that's exciting, Jeff, I don't know if it told you this, but we are expecting twins in January. Our youngest
wow.
daughter, so that'll put us at 10
You're
grandchildren.
going to be in double digits. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
we don't deserve it, but we have a lot of fun. And so just real quick, Phil and I worked very closely together. My brother Phil and I, we created a couple businesses together. We got into transportation. We got out of poultry and got into large storage, another idea that he had, and it worked really well. And then Phil and I we had 2 other guys that got together and created a local truck consignment company.
Mhm.
And God just blessed our businesses and really fortunate. And then in about 2004, Phil's oldest son was working for us, and we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we bring him in? How do we do this generational transition from generation 2, Phil and I, to his son, possibly our kids in the future? And we hired a local consultant, a guy by the name of Roger North, who
Mhm.
27 years ago, founded the company that I'm working for today.
Mhm.
Um, and then we went through that transition, brought Ryan in as a partner, really helped Phil and I in communication and some other things. And then in 2008, we went through a season, I went through a season where I was frustrated with my brother because
Mm.
my brother was at the point that he was out front, and I was in the back grinding through. And it's really a long story, but it was a spiritual journey that I went on and realized the problem was me. It
Mm.
wasn't Phil. It was the
Mm.
way I approached it. Um, Stayed in the business, so thankful that I was allowed and able to stay in the business and chose to stay. But then in 2012, God called Patty and I out of the business. And
Mhm.
you might ask, hey, how did that happen? What did that look like? And for us, it 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 was a process over about 15, 18 months where I just had this uh, calling on my life to say, okay, it's time for something different. Not that I was running from something, but I was running towards something. God called us out. We left in 2012, and then I joined North Group in 2013, and I've been here ever since. And
Mhm.
it's just been crazy cool because I get to sit in a room like I'm sitting in right now, where I get to sit with a business owner or a business leader or a supervisor, like I was just meeting with, or 2 brothers that are working together, or 2 brothers and a brother-in-law, or a
Mhm.
father and a son. Um,
Mhm.
and so we have a team of about 25 here. And so that's where I am today. And
So some of those experiences that you had growing up, not only those core values that were developed growing up, but then building that business, the family business, some of those experiences have got to be beneficial now as you meet with folks that you're consulting. Talk a little bit about what's that like to be able to share your experience and some of your wisdom at things that the journey that you've been on, and help others that are a little bit further behind you on the journey.
Wow. I don't, when I look in the mirror, I don't see somebody that's wise. I see somebody that's just a recovering farmer. I'm just trying to figure it out. And there's often times when I get to see things that are happening around me, and I'm able to say, but God. There's times when I'm sitting with, I had meetings where a father and a son are sitting there and they're pointing at each other and throwing the F-bombs at each other, and where I can look at him and say, okay, let's work this thing out, and to build that trust and rapport. Because you've been in family meetings, I've been in family meetings, and that history, that experience, we can bring into that meeting and say, okay, we can get through this. We can't get through it alone, number one. Number two, sometimes it's only but God that's going to show up to help to answer some of these prayers. And I could tell you story after story after story where God's shown up, whether it's in a secular situation that I'm sitting there praying for all I'm worth, in a meeting that's way beyond me, and to see what God's done, but to see also times when I'm sitting across the table from somebody and I'm saying, Jeff, I'm not sure. Let's take a break. Let's see if we can bring somebody else in that might have some more knowledge than we do or more experience than we do. But generosity for me lives out in that way. In those times of being able to come into the room and saying, guys, I'm not academically trained. I don't have the doctorate behind my name like a number of my colleagues do, but I still bring value because I've been there and understand. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it absolutely does. That experience, there's a lot of that builds a lot of trust, and that's where the trust. It all starts with that trust and the ability for them to lean into, okay, this is going to work, and knowing that you have some of that experience. Talk a little bit about, if you could, I'm going to come back to some of the experiences and the things that you've learned and the things that you could share, but I want to talk a little bit about broadening the palette here a little bit on the different types of generosity and the different types of capital. I mean, I've been recently reflecting and having some discussions with folks in reference to, the 5 different forms of capital. It's not just financial. There's spiritual, relational, human, and social. Besides that financial capital, talk a little bit about. I think you just referenced it, as far as being in the room and being able to bring some of that relational capital from your experience. But even as you think about some of the business leaders, some of the churches, some of the other organizations that you consult, and your own family, passing on from generation to generation, from business to business. Talk a little bit about the value of some of those other forms of capital.
I think one of them that I think of that I've referenced before I have a friend by the name of Barry, and he's taught me the generosity of prayer. That sometimes it's that simple of the generosity of prayer that before this event today, I can go to a close friend, one of my 3 a.m. friends, and I can send him a text and say, hey, will you pray for me today?
Yeah.
Because I want to point that out. I think also sometimes it's generosity can be as simple as a smile or a thumbs up. I had a client that worked in a flour mill, and he was very task oriented. He wanted to get from point A to point B, and he was talking about his his team didn't know and thought he was mad at him. I said, well, give him a thumbs up as you're going by. Tell him ahead of time, say, hey, things are good, and you can keep focusing on your task. I also think one of the things I learned from Roger North was the ability of writing a personal handwritten note, of being generous with just a simple word of affirmation, not a text, not an email, but a note of appreciation means a lot and goes a
Yeah.
long way.
Yeah.
I've seen,
There's it's hard to replicate in this day of AI, it's hard to replicate a personal handwritten note.
and sometimes it's as simple as a sentence or
Yeah.
two sentences.
Right.
And so I've seen generosity show up in so many different ways. We immediately think of, let me sit down and write the check.
Right.
But sometimes generosity is saying, no, I have access to this vehicle, or I have access to this load, or how can I show up at your house or your home to help? The other things that I've seen in generosity, it's for me, I've also found I got invited into a really small group. It was about 3 or 4 of us that we're getting together, and it was during COVID, and we were getting together talking about generosity and what did generosity look like. It was a very informal group. We weren't trying to raise money. It was just talking about generosity to keep it going. And it was a friend of mine that set that up, and he has 5 pillars to his idea, and he's gotten business owners together about twice a year, 3 times a year. And the whole idea is not to raise money, but the whole idea is just to spread the idea of generosity. And sometimes generosity is talking about generosity or asking a question to somebody to say, how can you be generous with what God's given you
In your hands? Yeah.
And for me, I'm in a different seat than a lot of the guests that you have on. You've had some fantastic guests on your podcast, and it's been fun to follow and to learn and listen. But I come in it and I feel fortunate because I get to talk to these different business owners, and some of them are doing it in stock. Some of them are doing it by saying, I'm being generous by not giving you shares in this business because of the situation that you're in or that I'm in. And it doesn't happen often, but it does happen.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, there's all different forms of generosity. God has put different skills, talents, and abilities in each of our hands. Talk a little bit more about some of the organizations and business owners that you've been able to get to know, to journey alongside of through transition or through, as they grow and develop and improve their organizational health and their performance. What are some of the things that you would share with our listeners if they're driving in the car, running on a treadmill, that you would share and say, here's a couple things that I picked up over the years?
Yeah. One of the things that I think about that I was taught by one of my mentors was that I've learned I want people around me like you, Jeff, that ask good questions. And when we have individuals around us that ask good questions, not that they're always looking for the answer, but that they're asking the good questions. That's one thing. The other thing that I've found is that there's times when there's great value in having a third party in the room when you're going through or approaching a challenging or a transitional period where you might be getting ready to exit. I have a client that is going from generation 1 to generation 2. Generation 1, husband, wife. Generation 2 is multiple family members. Not all the family are involved in the business, but for them to sit down and to have some of these difficult conversations. And this was an organization that I was allowed to be behind the curtain in some of these conversations and just to keep the process going.
Mhm.
I've also, in other things that I've learned, is that there's times that the owners or leaders' health, whether it's financial health, whether it's spiritual health, whether it's marital health, relational health with their kids, sometimes don't realize the importance of the way that plays back to their job.
Hmm.
Because when they get out of the car door or walk or ride bike or whatever they do, and they show up at work, that they need to have health engaged and figuring that out. The other thing that I see that I think is helpful for individuals is for them, and I see this in owners, I see this in technicians, boots on the ground individuals. A number of my clients are in the trades, so the individuals that are on the roof or pulling electric or whatever that might be, that when they can sit down and think about what are the characteristics or traits that they want in their job. So I think of it from four aspects when I'm sitting with an individual that's looking at making a job change. I look at it first, what are the characteristics or traits that you want in a job? Not what you're doing, but what are the characteristics and traits? Secondly, and there's probably people that are listening and this will make them chuckle, but what does success look like in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? But not only what does success look like for you, but what does success look like for your stakeholders? If you're married, if you have adult children, if you have adult, parents that are still alive, what does success look like? And then turn that on its head. Third point, what does failure look like in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? And for me, failure may be in some areas may be the exact same as my bride Patty, and some may be different here at my work at North Group.
Mm-hmm.
And then fourth, how do I want to be measured? How do I want to be measured in my job? And then for me, how do I want to be measured by the leaders of our organization and also by the clients that I sit in front of or the possible candidates that I sit in front of and interview for? And so that's been some things that have been helpful to take that I've heard from other business owners to take through. Does that help a little bit?
Those are really good questions, and it helps us go deep. I love the fast forwarding and saying, what does success look like? What does failure look like? How do you measure it? And how do you also measure it with the other stakeholders that
Right.
you're, whether it's a spouse, a business partner? That's really strong. Yeah.
Right.
So Roger, what else? We're coming around third base here. What are some of the any other stories, things that you'd like to share before we come down the
Yeah.
home stretch? Because I want to, while you're thinking about that, I want to come back to what's your one tip that if you had only one thing, and I know you shared a bunch of them here, they're really good.
I'm not ready on the one tip because
Okay,
what I want to share
good.
is this journey that God has placed me on. Um, there's been days when it's really been dark,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll go into a little detail about that. When Patty and I, when we left the family business in 2012, there was some things on the positive side and there was things on the challenging side.
Mm-hmm.
I met with two individuals that were really close in my life and told them and said, "Hey, I'm leaving the family business." And I could, it was in January of 2012 when I was leaving, and I told him, and one individual looked at me and he said, Roger, you are an idiot. What have you done?
Wow.
The other individual at the table looked at me and said, yes, this is great. This is awesome. And Jeff, they were both right. I was an idiot to leave the family business because if you would, you're a numbers guy, if you would run a balance sheet, a comparison balance sheet, and run it over here in 2012 and run it over here, if I would have stayed where I am, God has blessed my brother and his boys and his businesses just phenomenally financially after I left. And praise God for that. But for me, the other side, my financial balance sheet was burning like an inferno, which wasn't fun. But I watched the way that me leaving the family business, the way that our 4 kids, at that point there was 5 because our son-in-law was now in the picture, and the way they came around, it was really, really cool. That's one thing. The other thing on the relational side that I never saw coming was the strength of those guys that were my 3 a.m. friends, that when I was in a tough place, they were able to come back and say, I got you, I got your back. We have this thing among a couple of us where when I send a text and I say, I need coverage, we have an agreement, and we set this up ahead of time. We have an agreement, but the agreement is that we will not ask questions when we ask each other for coverage. We will not ask, is it home? Is it work? Is it is it financial? No. But I know beyond a shadow of a doubt when I go to them and I say I need coverage, that they're going to take me before the throne of grace. That's powerful.
Wow. That's awesome. That is really powerful.
The other thing that I'd like to share that's been really interesting is that when I left, I went through a season. I don't ever regret leaving, Jeff. I know God's in it, and I know God has me right where I'm supposed to be, because through this process of leaving the family business, the phone has been, I've received phone calls, texts, emails. Guys say, hey, can you meet with so-and-so? They're considering transition. They aren't sure what's next. They need somebody just to encourage them. And I'm like leaning in hard.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
One other story that I want to share. When I left, I was dealing with some dark days, and I thought of calling up one of my Sunday school teachers, and he lived up north. He was in business up north. And I called him and I told him, hey, I said, I have these voices in my head rolling. And he said, Raj, he said, one is don't let those voices grow nests. Don't concentrate on them. Thought that's good advice. And this is hard for me to share publicly. But the other thing that he told me was, he said, Raj, he said, every time you see one of your brother's trucks roll by, every time you get something in the mail that has your brother's business's names on it, every time one of your friends brings up your brother's names, or you drive past his business operation, pray a blessing on his business. I'm not a prosperity gospel guy, but I said, oh yeah, that's going to be easy. Jeff, that's been the hardest thing, but it's something that I've attempted to do. And I'm thankful that God has allowed me to do that. Phil and I said, if we could make it to 5 years and sit at Thanksgiving table, we'd be here, we'd be good. Well, here we are 12 years later. We just went for dinner to celebrate Mom's 90th birthday, and thankful to be together. So that's just a
That's
quick
really
story. It's
powerful.
not been easy. It's
Yeah.
not been easy.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And that's
Yeah.
there's a lot of our listeners, a lot of family businesses. There's journeys, and we all have the struggles that we go through, the challenges, and then God is faithful. I think as we share our burdens with others through those journeys, it definitely we're to bear each other's burdens.
Mhm.
You know, mourn with those who mourn, and rejoice with those who rejoice. And it's really cool. I'd love the praying a blessing on your brother's business as you see those cards and trucks, and
Mhm.
that's a huge that's great advice, and that's a form of generosity as well. And
And
your family, yeah.
for me, I needed to do it as a piece of healing to say,
Yeah,
God's in this and God's got this.
yeah, yeah.
And the other thing I'd say is if anybody that's listening to this, if I can be an encouragement, if I can pray for you, if you want to chat, call me up. I mean,
We will definitely
Yeah.
we'll put your contact information in the show notes, and for sure, reach out to Roger, reach out to the North Group. This really appreciate. Well, we are out of time, but would love to hear one last word of, if you have another story, or if you have one more. What's one tip?
One tip for me that God has placed on my heart recently, because in junior high, I was the unseen kid. I was the kid that had a lot, but I was the unseen kid. And so my question or my suggestion is, who are the unseen individuals in your life?
Wow, that's
And
powerful.
how can they be acknowledged or encouraged? Sometimes it's as simple as giving them the fist bump. I told you earlier, I serve with a ministry using bicycles to point boys and girls to Jesus. And one of our cores of who we are is, let's find those unseen kids, those kids that are dealing with parents in divorce, those parents who are dealing financially or have tough families. So who are the unseen individuals in your life, and how can they be seen and encouraged, and that you can pray for them?
I love it. I love it. Well, we're going to title this episode "From Cantelopes and Firecrackers to Ministering to Unseen Kids," and pointing them towards Jesus. That might be too long of a title, but we'll figure it out. Roger, thank you so much for your
So
life,
welcome.
your hungry, humble, smart mindset, and you've been just knowing you personally, and knowing your family. You've been just a friend, a mentor, and a guiding light for so many people in a very, very humble way. But I appreciate it, and I'm sure that's coming through to our listeners as well.
You're very kind. Thanks for including me. I feel like I'm out of the norm of these individuals that have
Yeah,
built these really cool businesses, but it's
that,
okay. For me, it's what God put in my hands, and all I want to do is share it. And so
exactly.
thanks for the opportunity,
Yeah.
and to God be the glory.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you, Roger, and thanks everyone for joining us on this week's episode of the Generous Business Owners Podcast. We'll see y'all
Thank
next
you.
week.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.